Epilogue. Their happiness was as if they were floating upon the downy clouds of dawn, and they danced amongst the morning. Absolutely not, said Philip, tossing aside the flower crown he had been weaving, and burying his face in his hands. It's only been 2 years. How can you not remember exactly what happened in a way that is to my liking? Joanna snapped her book shut, and Joanna snapped her book shut. He never should have gifted it to her, and grinned. I knew you would hate it. That's why I wrote it like that. Sir Joanna of Artwine had been the first to put the story of Maleficent's defeat to paper, much to Philip's chagrin. It was mostly accurate. It did feature far more than simply his mistakes, fortunately, and plenty of the stories of the people who had been caught in Maleficent's work decades earlier and recently. Joanna had found old stories between Maleficent's first defeat and return, and towns sieged by strange, unquenchable wildfires down south, and roads where shadows danced and stalked all who traveled along them. A dozen farms out east had been deluged with storms, and children told scary stories of the lady in the dress like lightning. Before they had tricked Philip, Maleficent's fairies had been busy sowing chaos. There was far more to the story than an evil fairy, a curse, and a princess. Joanna was still uncovering all of it, and that included hunting down Eris. Philip had taken a far more relaxed approach to the 2 years after defeating Maleficent. That's fair enough and all, but you never threw me over your shoulder when helping me learn magic, he said. Joanna arched a brow at him and said, Prove it. Philip snorted. It was easier to joke about Maleficent and his time with the fairies now. Briar Rose's birthday had made everyone nervous the past year, despite their certainty that the evil fairy was gone. So this year, her parents had indulged her. The party was only close friends and family, though Kings Hubert and Stefan were loud enough for a whole crowd and had gathered in the sun-warmed grass of King Stefan's gardens beneath a canopy of climbing roses cultivating by Briar Rose. Most of the guests were caught up in their own conversations, so Philip didn't mind the ribbing. I think it's a lovely ode, said Briar Rose, and the barely contained laughter warbled in her voice. Better you get thrown a few times than some stranger writes about how noble and shining and handsome and wonderful you are, and then everyone expects you to be like one of those perfect knights of old. Yes, I would hate to be described as handsome, he muttered, and leaned back in the grass. Briar Rose laughed, loud and unrestrained. Sunlight caught in the curls of her hair and the lines of her throat, and it took everything within Philip to keep from smiling. You wound me, said Philip, and he clutched his chest. Where is a cursed sleep when you need one? She laughed again, and Philip kissed Briar Rose's cheek. She squeezed his hand. Joanna watched with a wry smile. Her interest in romance was still strictly academic. I left out how you ruined my dubbing ceremony a whole year in advance, she said loudly, glancing toward his father. Philip groaned. His father loved telling that story. Amidst themselves in my castle, King Hubert shouted, slapping the blanketed ground. Nearly ripped the whole wall down when they took the shield of virtue. It had been a sight. Joanna attired in her best, her black hair woven with gold and her hands stained in flowing designs. Philip's father was presenting her with the sword she would carry from then on when the scent of linseed oil and the rattling footfalls of Amos's armor had filled the hall. They had declared their intentions against the thief Philip, the politest thing he had ever been called, though a solid blow to his pride, and retaken the shield. They had left without another word, only inclining their head to Joanna. You had the most memorable ceremony in centuries, said Philip, and they acknowledged you, Joanna, the honorable. He jabbed his finger to her to emphasize the words, and Joanna hid her smile. Of Artwine, King Hubert applauded. "Our Joanna chosen by Amos." Philip laughed. His father's boisterous attitude was mostly easier to handle now. They'd had it out, as his father put it now, yelling at each other in turns in the weeks after Maleficent's defeat. Philip had still been furious about everything, even if he liked his father's newfound pride in him, and his father hadn't been able to figure out why Philip was upset that his father was proud of him. There had been several awkward fights before Philip had brought up Eris, and then King Hubert had understood how much he had hurt his son. He had spent a whole week just talking with Philip after that. That was the first time he saw his father cry. Their relationship wasn't perfect now, but it was fine. Nice even. "And now we're all busy living happily ever after and dancing at dawn," said Briar Rose. "Though happily ever after does seem vague." "I'm sorry," Philip stole her cup of barley water. "Are you not happy, birthday girl?" Her parents and King Hubert perked up at that, pretending not to listen closely. Getting over Philip and Briar Rose's calling off their wedding had been one of the steps toward reconciliation. Queen Leah had seen the sense in it first, when she realized how unprepared Briar Rose was for the life she'd been thrust into. King Hubert's conflating of Philip with his ideal heir was the same issue at the heart of the betrothal. They thought of their children as extensions of themselves. Briar Rose's parents had come around first, eager to build a relationship with her. They were being as gentle as Briar Rose usually was with injured baby animals. In the past 2 years, there had been heavy discussions, teary family meals, and a lot of talks Philip had heard about from Briar Rose. She had gotten used to most parts of her new life, though not doing her own darning had taken far longer to learn than holding court and bookkeeping. But large crowds still unnerved her. Queen Leah had spent weeks trying to decide if the picnic would be appreciated. "I am devastated," Briar Rose said, and sniffed, tilting her head to stare down at her nose at him in a perfect copy of her mother. "Only this party and Joanna's gift of our story have kept me from dying of a broken heart." "I'll be taking my gift back then," Philip said, and held out his hand. Briar Rose tightened her grip on the crate next to her. "I didn't say you should do that." The crate of flower bulbs he'd had imported from the far north was more of a promise than a gift. They hadn't traveled outside of Altor and Artwine yet. Briar Rose had wanted to see the kingdom that was her home, and there had been a lot to do to ensure both kingdoms were safe after Maleficent's fall. They had spent the better part of the years getting to even ground with their parents and figuring out what their roles in this new world were. Briar Rose finally seemed used to life outside the cottage in the glen, though he knew she was still desperate to see the world. "So fickle," he said, and tapping her nose. That was only part of the gift anyway, and he hoped to make the rest happen soon. "Part of?" She glanced around them. "Is the rest a secret?" "Maybe." The party was winding down. King Stefan was laughing at something Queen Leah said, and Philip's father slapped him on the back. Joanna beamed, and Philip's father toasted her. Knighthood suited her far better than it had ever suited Philip. "Want to get out of here?" Philip whispered to Briar Rose, pointing at the Queen, who was refilling Joanna's cup, and King Hubert, who was downing his. "That is a game of skumps in the making, and I may love my father now, but I know better than to play drinking games with him." Briar Rose laughed and nodded. They slipped from their seats with no one but the fairies noticing. Flora gave Briar Rose a little wave. Philip hoped the others would understand the pair's need to escape from the crowd and noise, and he would take the blame if they did mind. Philip carried the crate of flower bulbs and nodded toward the edge of the garden. Their horses perked up as they neared. "Your father's much improved," she said. "Still loud, though." "Oh, I don't think any amount of long talks will quiet him down," said Philip. He apologized. Never heard of him doing that before. It had been the most awkward moment of Philip's life. But King Hubert was proud of Philip, and would say so to anyone within hearing range, even if he didn't quite agree with Philip's turn into statecraft over knighthood. Politics was far more like a game of chess than the war games King Hubert preferred, and Philip had gotten quite good at chess of late. "Hello, Bear." Briar Rose stroked her palfrey's side and offered her an apple slice smeared with plum jam. She kissed her horse's temple. "Happy birthday." Philip and Queen Leah had spent weeks finding the perfect horse for Briar Rose's birthday the past year, and Briar Rose had taken one look at the warm brown palfrey, munching on every piece of food in sight, and named her in a heartbeat. They hadn't really been apart yet, since. "It's not her birthday, you know," he said, and let Samson fish a small apple from his pocket. Briar Rose glanced at him. "I don't know her birthday, so the best I can do is celebrate the day we met." It was exceptionally easy to love her. "I want to find the perfect place to plant these," said Briar Rose, eyeing a distant corner of the garden. "Do you think Joanna would like any if I managed to grow a few?" Joanna would accept it with a smile and come to him in a panic, because she didn't know how to keep anything except him and Taliesin alive. "She hasn't gotten a green thumb. Too much ink," he said. They fit you far better anyway, sleeping until spring, when they come alive again." Briar Rose smiled. "Did she write a poem?" "It's in the works, but act surprised if it's your next birthday gift." She laughed and nodded. They made their way toward the plot slowly, Samson and Bear ambling behind them. It was difficult to believe that only 2 years earlier their futures had been precarious and they had never even spoken to each other. If not for the Dreamwood, he wasn't sure what would have happened. They hadn't dreamed of it since the curse ended. Briar Rose circled the little nook of the garden she liked, tied up the long skirts of her gown to keep them from getting too dirty, and knelt in the grass. A squirrel crept forward and sniffed at her crate of bulbs. "No digging these up," said Briar Rose. "I'll give you all the food you want, but you can't go rooting around in the garden, understood?" The squirrel chattered in a way that might have been agreement and dashed off to the others watching from the tree. She shooed them away with a grin and got to work, testing out the earth with her hands. Philip settled next to her and passed her each bulb as she went. She hummed as she worked. There was something intimate about silence, something cozy and safe in knowing so much about another person that there wasn't any conversation that would improve the moment. To know she was comfortable enough to be Briar Rose and not Princess Aurora around him was so dear to him his heart ached. "I love you," he said softly. They had been together and apart in equal measure the past 2 years, and Philip didn't want to be apart from her any or more than necessary from then on out. He picked up the final bulb, cupping it gently in his palms, and watched her press the dirt over the bulbs as if she were tucking them into bed. They had grown together, and he couldn't wait to keep growing with her. Philip offered her the final bulb. "I love you too." She brushed off her hands and turned to him. "What's wrong?" "Absolutely nothing," said Philip, his heart in his throat. He knew she loved him better than he knew anything at all, but still the words would barely come. "How do you feel about long engagements?" She planted the final bulb, her only tell the pink blooming high on her cheeks. "An odd question since we're technically still engaged, but that is our parents' doing, not ours." He folded his shaking hands in his lap and focused on a spot just over her shoulder. "Now that you've had a chance to settle into Altor and you've been to Artwine, how would you feel about visiting some other kingdoms? like the ones that's home to those flowers. She grinned and nodded, leaning into him until she could catch his gaze. I would love to do that. But what does traveling have to do with engagements? An engagement means our parents won't mind us being gone for a while. Philip, she pressed her forward to his, is this theoretical engagement solely for their sake? He swallowed, nerves writhing in his chest. No, it's just, they're so loud, and I thought, so I already planned it all regardless of if they agree to it or not. And we leave at night if they don't. Joanna's in on the trip, as are some of the other knights. I don't really care what they say, but you've been building your relationship with them. So I didn't want to shatter it by just taking off with you, because I know you'll go. Not that you have to. We can still go no matter what their response or your answer is. Briar Rose kissed him, stopping his rambling and nerves, and he followed her when she pulled away. She pressed a finger to his lips. I would give you an answer if you asked me a question, she said. Philip grinned, relief bubbling out of him as laughter. Will you marry me? I would love to marry you when we return from this grand adventure of yours. She kissed him again and tasted as sweet as the words sounded. Our parents are going to shriek so loudly they'll wake up Maleficent from death, she said, when they parted. We have to wait to tell them. Philip shrugged. We'll keep you away from spindles on our wedding day, then. That would make a good story. Briar Rose leaned back and dragged him down with her until they were both staring up at the sky through a veil of leaves. Can we make Joanna our official historian? Only if you want the history books and an iambic pentameter. Philip brought her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles. How would you tell our story? Briar Rose laughed. Curses and dragons and fights are all well and good, but our story started far earlier than that. It all began with a dream I had as a child. And that's the ending of a Disney Prince novel, Prince of Thorns and Nightmares. I hope you enjoyed the story with me as much as I enjoyed it. Until next time, safe travels, be well, and see you real soon. Have a magical day.